They double-kicked her to the floor, hard, in front of 282 Navy SEALs during a live training demo meant to teach survival techniques, not test them. She didn't scream. She didn't lash out. She stood up. And when both men tried to laugh it off, she broke one of their knees sideways, shattered the other's ankle on impact. 7 seconds, 2 clean takedowns, no wasted motion, because that day, she wasn't just showing technique, she was showing restraint, right up until they gave her a reason not to. Now, before we show you the exact moment both men hit the mat and what the SEAL Command wrote in their final report, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Tap like, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell icon. Because today, she didn't prove her strength with words, she proved it with breaks. The wind off the Atlantic snapped hard across the concrete open-air corridor of Naval Special Warfare Command Unit 7. It was barely so 800, but already the sun had begun to burn down through the mist, turning the coastline haze into glare off the distant water. The base pulsed with its usual rhythm, rhythmic footfalls, shouted cadence, steel on steel. But today wasn't normal. Today was Readiness Evaluation Day. 282 Navy SEALs and support personnel had been ordered to report for a live inter-unit coordination drill, standard protocol once every fiscal quarter. But what made this particular session different wasn't just the size. It was the inclusion of a joint medic response exercise. And standing at the center of it, quietly adjusting the cuffs on her combat fatigues, was Petty Officer First Class Elena Kincaid. She was 28, average in stature, with dark brown hair braided tight under her cover, and a face that didn't invite much speculation. Not stoic, just focused. Most people didn't look twice. But if they did, they might have noticed the recon tab half faded on the sleeve of her old Marine utility jacket, the one she hadn't quite given up since transferring over. 3 deployments, 2 as a combat field medic, 1 embedded with a forward recon team that didn't exist on any open source tracker, but you wouldn't know it from the way she stood. She wasn't there to impress anyone. Concaid had been reassigned 6 months earlier to the SEAL Logistics Assessment Wing after a spinal shrapnel extraction she performed under blackout conditions made it into the quarterly operations report. She'd never expected the transfer, much less the direct request from a naval evaluation officer. But she didn't ask questions, just followed orders. Now, standing at the outer ring of the evaluation compound, surrounded by men who could all bench twice her body weight and carry an operator's kit over 40 clicks, she was here to do something far more delicate, demonstrate defensive engagement techniques for medics under ambush. Field medics didn't get the same kind of spotlight. Their drills were usually quiet, methodical, support roles. But this time, the brass wanted something different, something kinetic. They wanted the SEAL teams to see what a non-operator could do when cornered while trying to treat the wounded. And Elena Kincaid didn't flinch from that request. She was dressed standard issue, tan tactical pants, black compression top, utility belt, and training gloves. No rank display, no gear theatrics, just the tools she needed. As she paced to the front of the cordoned-off ring on the training ground, she clocked the looks, the half-smirks, the cocked brows. "Is that the medic?" one voice whispered near the side rail. "Damn, they could have at least sent a corpsman who looked like he's seen a fight," another added. She heard it. She always heard it. But she let it pass like static. From the platform, Chief Instructor Harmon gave the formal intro. Today's module will focus on field medic retention protocols, specifically how to engage when surrounded in confined terrain while treating a downed operative. Your instructor, Petty Officer First Class Kincaid, has cross-branch clearance and authorization to demonstrate controlled hand-to-hand disarmament and escape techniques. A low murmur rippled through the group. Someone coughed deliberately. Kincaid stepped forward. She didn't project, didn't bark, just lifted her chin slightly, the way she'd learned in recon briefings. Never up, never down, just level. "I'm not here to show you something flashy," she said, her voice clear but unforced. "I'm here to show you how to stay alive when you're the only person between someone bleeding out and a blade coming from behind." There were no cheers, no applause, just stares. But some of the more seasoned SEALs began to shift forward, their postures changing slightly, watching, not mocking, measuring. The newer ones, the louder ones, weren't so quiet yet. But Kincaid didn't care. She clipped her gloves into place, stepped to the center of the circle forming slowly around her, and nodded once toward the first volunteer. Behind her, 282 SEALs watched the woman they didn't expect to learn anything from. They'd remember her name by the end of the hour, but not for the reason any of them imagined. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. As the demonstration circle solidified, two figures stood out, not because they tried to, but because everything about them demanded attention. Senior operator Marcus Hale and trainee Brandon Riker, both part of Gold Team rotation, both walking cliches of kinetic dominance. Marcus was 6'3", barrel-chested, the kind of SEAL who trained like combat, was still decided by brute force alone. His arms were inked with jagged line work, battle dates, dead friends, deadlier victories. He carried himself like someone who believed strength won arguments and settled debates before they began. Brandon was younger, leaner, fresh off a probationary assignment, with something to prove. He moved like he thought he was in a movie, smirking, swaggering, already adopting Marcus's cadence like a loyal younger brother. They stood side by side, near the front of the crowd, arms crossed, boots planted like boulders. But it was their mouths that did most of the damage. "You seeing this?" Brandon murmured, his voice pitched just loud enough for nearby SEALs to hear. "She's half my size and trying to teach us how to not die." Marcus didn't smile. He just let out a low breath through his nose, amused. "It's medic ballet," he said. "They want us to clap when she twirls." A few others around them chuckled, not many, but enough to fracture the mood. To the left, a corpsman with a shaved head and sleeve tattoos shot them a brief glare. He didn't say anything, but his posture stiffened. Across the ring, another operator, older, wiry, with the haunted look of too many deployments, shifted his gaze to Elena and narrowed his eyes. He wasn't laughing, but Marcus and Brandon didn't care. Theirs was a private club, even within the SEALs. The old guard physical elite, the kind who judged you before you moved, decided your worth before you spoke. Elena didn't acknowledge them. She was working through shoulder roll warm-ups with the first volunteer, her movement calm, efficient. No showmanship, no wasted motion. "That's it," Brandon whispered. "Elbow up, turn the hips. That's how you stop a bullet." Marcus cracked his knuckles loud. "Whole thing's a PR stunt," he muttered. "They want the brass to see we're being progressive. Stick a woman in the pit, make the SEALs clap for her. Call it a win for the new Navy." "Hey," Brandon added, leaning toward a nearby tech sergeant. "Think they'll make us do jazz hands next?" This time the joke didn't land. The tech sergeant didn't respond, and a few SEALs behind them had gone silent. It was subtle, but the shift had begun. Jokes were fine, until they weren't, until they came from a place too bitter to ignore. The room hadn't turned on them yet, but the tension had changed shape, no longer collective amusement. Now it was fragmented. Elena was aware of the commentary. You could see it in the slight change in her breathing. Still calm, still steady, but more deliberate. She didn't glance their way, didn't engage, just waited patiently as her volunteer reset into position. Chief Harmon noticed the whispering. His brow twitched, but he didn't intervene. Not yet. This was still within the realm of banter, still plausible deniability, but a few soldiers in the back had stopped looking at Elena and started watching Marcus and Brandon instead, like they sensed the storm before it formed, like they knew exactly what kind of men couldn't handle being outperformed by someone who didn't fit the image in their head. And what those men might do to fix that. Elena Kincaid stepped to the center of the mat with the quiet precision of someone who didn't need to be loud to own the space. She faced her first volunteer, a SEAL second class from Black Squadron who'd been briefed to play a hostile with a simulated injury scenario. The man nodded once, respectfully, and dropped into a crouch to simulate being wounded. Elena didn't explain with theatrics. She just spoke, firm, calm, direct. If you're treating someone and get ambushed, you don't fight for dominance. You fight for a half-second window, she said. You don't overpower. You redirect. You don't brace. You break, fast, clean, no waste. The first demonstration began with her kneeling beside the wounded SEAL, miming the stabilization of a femoral bleed. The volunteer twisted up from the ground suddenly, playing the ambusher. Elena shifted with him. Her knee dropped, elbow angled under his incoming arm, her entire body rolling into his off-balance momentum until his weight carried him flat across the mat with a soft thump. She stayed low, controlled, had her hand pinned lightly to his wrist in a joint-neutral lock position before he could even fully react. The watching SEALs, once loose-jawed and casually positioned, were now squinting, evaluating. Some crossed their arms tighter. A few leaned forward. One even muttered, "Huh," under his breath. Elena released the volunteer, stood and reset without speaking. Her second demo came faster. The same wounded position posture, different attack angle. This time the volunteer lunged from behind. She didn't flinch. She ducked, pivoted, caught his forearm under her own, and dropped her hip in a twist that forced the attacker's center mass forward, then spun, locking him in a mock choke with her free arm, ending with a stabilized base between his shoulders. Once again, no flair, no smiling, just clinical execution. "Notice the frame," she said. "You don't push, you shape." Behind her, Marcus scoffed. "Yeah," he muttered to Brandon. "You shape a good Instagram reel." Brandon chuckled. "All this only works if your enemy attacks you in slow motion." The words were louder now, bolder. Chief Harmon glanced their way from across the compound, jaw tightening slightly. He still didn't intervene, but his gaze lingered this time. Elena said nothing. She just reset. A third volunteer stepped up. A larger man this time. SEAL First Class, 240 pounds. No scripted moves, just a general instruction to act like he was reaching to grab her plate carrier from behind. The kind of attack that could knock an average body flat. He lunged, and in less than 3 seconds, Elena had redirected the grab, dropped her weight, rotated under his arm, and slid behind his stance with her forearm against his spine and one palm wrapped lightly around his opposite elbow. The man nodded once, tapped out silently, and disengaged. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "That's real." But Marcus and Brandon weren't backing off. "She choreographed that," Brandon said loudly. "He was helping her." Marcus smiled this time, wide, performative. "She can't do that against 2 actual threats. No one's waiting their turn out there." A few heads turned toward them. Not in support, not anymore. Elena straightened, nodded toward Chief Harmon, and requested one final scenario, simulated encirclement with 2 approaching threats. The chief raised an eyebrow but nodded. She turned back to the crowd. 2 attackers is a different protocol, she said. She didn't mention names, didn't challenge, but Marcus and Brandon had already stepped forward, grinning like the stage had been set for them all along. The demonstration was supposed to reset. That was the word the chief used, reset the frame. But Marcus Hale and Brandon Riker didn't wait for orders. They stepped into the circle with the kind of swagger that made some of the other SEALs instinctively clear a path. Not out of respect, but out of calculation. The kind that comes when you know a situation's about to tip. Marcus moved first, slow, deliberate. As Elena turned to face the center again, he passed her shoulder, just close enough to make contact. A hard bump. Nothing dramatic, but just enough to throw her balance slightly. She absorbed it without a word. Adjusted. Didn't even look at him. Brandon grinned wide and exaggerated a stumble behind her, arms flailing like a cartoon mockery of being hit. "Whoa," he said. "Careful, Doc. Don't want to catch a shoulder cramp before we start dancing." A few uneasy laughs rippled through the crowd, but they died quickly. The silence afterward was louder. Elena took one step back, reset her posture, checked her spacing. Chief Harmon stepped toward the edge of the circle. "This is still a controlled demonstration," he said sharply. "All movements will follow the approved contact parameters unless otherwise stated." Brandon raised both hands like a man trying to look innocent. "No worries, Chief. Just getting into character." Marcus kept walking the edge of the circle, stretching his neck from side to side like a predator loosening his collar. Elena finally spoke. Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't shake. "This is not a game environment," she said. "This drill simulates close quarters combat while under threat during casualty extraction." Marcus laughed. Not a full laugh, but that short nasal exhale of someone who doesn't take warnings seriously. "So simulate it," he said. Brandon was behind her now, close, not touching, but hovering. "Let's see what happens when 2 attackers don't ask permission," he said, echoing the earlier mockery. The phrase landed like a gauntlet. A few of the senior SEALs visibly stiffened. Chief Harmon paused. His mouth opened, then closed again. This was no longer unfolding under his structure, but pulling them out now, disciplining them before anything happened. would escalate the situation publicly, and he knew it. So instead, he made a call. He stepped forward and raised a hand. Demonstration continues under my supervision, he said flatly. No head strikes, no intentional trauma. You will simulate the engagement scenario only, a single sequence, understood? Neither man answered, but both nodded, just enough to be technically compliant. The crowd had compressed now, tighter, no longer the loose arc of a learning session. Now it was a ring, a live wire of tension and unspoken calculus. Elena took one step forward into the center. Marcus cracked his neck again. Brandon bounced on the balls of his feet, and around them, 282 SEALs watched in silence. They didn't know what was about to happen, but every man there could feel it. This wasn't a drill anymore. This was something else. There was no formal signal, no command, no countdown, just movement, fast, sudden, and wrong. Marcus lunged from Elena's right, cutting the angle with the confidence of a man who'd done 1,000 breach room clears. Brandon came from the left, a split second behind him. Their choreography crude but synchronized with one purpose: impact. It wasn't a mock rush. It wasn't a training-paced lunge. It was real. Both men threw their full weight into simultaneous driving kicks. Marcus aiming mid-rib, Brandon targeting her thigh and side. It happened in less than a second. Elena caught a flicker of motion, enough to brace her core, but not reposition. The first blow connected with the side of her ribs. A shockwave of pain shot through her torso. The second caught her off-balance leg, collapsing it inward. Her body dropped, hard. Her spine hit mat first. Her elbow slammed next. She rolled instinctively to protect her head. But the breath had already left her lungs in a sharp grunt. The sound was sickening in its clarity. Not the rehearsed slap of mat contact, but the raw thud of an uncontrolled fall. And the entire circle of SEALs stopped breathing. You could hear a boot scrape, a distant gull, the wind tugging faintly at the overhead rig lines. But nothing else. Chief Harmon froze mid-step. One of the squad medics took an unconscious step forward before catching himself. No one moved. No one needed to. Because in that moment, every trained operator in that circle realized the same thing. That wasn't part of the demo. The energy had shifted violently, like a detonation without sound. The kind of shift that rewrites everything before it. What had seconds earlier been a play fight was now something primal. Elena didn't speak, didn't gasp, didn't moan. She just lay there for a beat, face unreadable, eyes focused, ribs rising in short, shallow movements, until her right hand curled inward, found the mat, and pushed. The sound of her glove scraping vinyl was somehow louder than the kick had been. Brandon took a step back, suddenly unsure of the silence he'd created. Marcus rolled his shoulders and tried to look casual, but his chest was rising faster than before. In the crowd, someone whispered, "She okay?" No one answered, because Elena Kincaid was already rising. Not slowly, not shakily, but with the tension of a string being reset. Her boots realigned under her, her shoulders squared, her breathing steadied, and then she looked up, straight at both of them. Her voice was low, flat, but it cut across the entire formation. "You've crossed into live response." That was all she said. But in that single sentence, every man in that circle understood. This was no longer a drill. This was survival. Elena didn't posture. She didn't square up like a fighter. She didn't say another word. She simply stood, both feet under her, spine realigned, breath steady. There was no dramatic pose, no clenched fists, just a shift in energy, like someone had flipped a switch inside her frame, trading explanation for execution. Her eyes moved between Marcus and Brandon once. No emotion, just calibration. Marcus cracked his knuckles and started circling. Brandon flexed his fingers, still trying to play it off. "Didn't mean to knock you down that hard," he said, half smiling. "It's just reflex, you know?" Elena didn't respond. She took 2 steps forward. Nothing aggressive, just reclaiming ground. The way a surgeon repositions before making a cut. Chief Harmon hadn't moved. No one had. The 282 Navy SEALs stood frozen in formation around them. No longer students, no longer observers, just witnesses to something they couldn't categorize yet. Something breaking rank. And then Marcus spoke. Low and confident. "Still standing, huh? Let's see how long that lasts." He didn't say it to her. He said it to the circle, to the crowd, to the weight of masculinity that had always protected him from consequences. Brandon let out a quick breath, rolling his shoulders. He looked to Marcus. They nodded, subtle, synchronized. They thought they were still in control, thought they had set the tempo. Elena's weight shifted again, barely visible. Her right foot half rotated, left shoulder dipped 1 inch, her fingers relaxed. And across the ring, 3 senior SEALs exchanged a glance. They'd seen that posture before, not in training, in country. It was the stance someone takes just before a confirmed kill. The crowd didn't murmur, didn't lean in. They went still. And for the first time, Marcus blinked too fast. Brandon's smirk faltered. Because Elena Kincaid wasn't standing like someone trying to prove a point. She was standing like someone who knew exactly what was about to happen and wasn't going to stop it. Marcus struck first. He moved fast, training speed fast. Not reckless, not wide. He came in like he'd done this 100 times. Tight guard, centerline charge, leading with his forearm to disrupt balance and pin his target. But Elena wasn't there. She rotated just outside his arc, her left foot pivoting with surgical timing. And as Marcus's arm cleared the space where her shoulder had been, she redirected her own weight forward, catching his extended wrist with one hand while planting her opposite forearm against the inside of his knee. A half-second of leverage. Then, crack! The sound was unmistakable. A dry, splitting snap that echoed over the concrete like a snapped branch in dead silence. Marcus went down hard, not yelling, howling. His leg bent the wrong way under his weight. The knee collapsed inward, and his boot skidded uselessly across the mat as he screamed, clutching the joint with both hands. Gasps rippled across the crowd, but Elena didn't look down. She was already pivoting. Brandon hesitated, just for a moment. That fraction of a second that lives between witnessing and reacting. He lunged too late, half panicked, reaching for her shoulder with his dominant hand. Elena dropped under it, one leg forward, one heel pivoting behind. She caught his wrist mid-lunge, turned her body with him instead of resisting, and wrenched downward in a low twist, pulling his center of gravity off axis just enough to stagger him. Then her heel came up, driving directly into the inside of his planted knee as she spun. Snap. A different sound than Marcus's break. Deeper, heavier, a wet bone-on-bone rupture. Brandon didn't even scream at first. He dropped, and then the yell came, sharp, high-pitched, like the kind of noise you only make when the pain arrives before your mind can understand what's happened. 2 bodies, down, 2 legs, broken, 1 medic, still standing. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't breathe. They just stood, 282 of them, motionless inside the ring they'd formed, surrounded now by the wreckage of their own assumptions. One SEAL vomited quietly against his glove. Another crossed himself and muttered, "Holy God." Chief Harmon took 2 steps forward, then stopped, his hand half raised, unsure whether to intervene or simply absorb what had unfolded. Elena didn't gloat, didn't pose. She backed away from both men and lowered to a crouch, not to follow through, not to humiliate, but to stabilize. She checked Marcus's breathing, then Brandon's pulse. When she finally stood, her chest was rising and falling with control. Not fury, not adrenaline, just breath, just procedure. And across the ring, every man who had once chuckled stood absolutely still, because what they had just witnessed wasn't bravado. It was anatomy, precision, justice, and it had unfolded in under 7 seconds. The silence didn't lift. It deepened. Marcus Hale lay curled, his body twisted awkwardly around a leg that no longer supported weight. His jaw was locked tight, his screams now breathless groans. Nearby, Brandon Riker rocked back and forth, cradling his leg with both hands, teeth chattering, not from cold, but from trauma. 2 men who'd walked into the circle like they owned it, now couldn't stand, couldn't speak. The circle held. All 282 men still in formation. No one moved toward the center, except her. Elena Kincaid, still breathing, with the rhythm of someone mid-drill, stepped away from the wreckage of her own response and turned to the side. "Call medical," she said, level, firm. Brandon's losing circulation in his foot. She wasn't wrong. His face had gone a strange shade of gray. Chief Harmon jolted into motion like he'd been rebooted by her voice. "Corman!" he barked. "Now!" Two base medics rushed through the crowd. One dropped beside Marcus, already unwrapping compression gauze. The other slid to Brandon and opened a field trauma kit. The rest of the SEALs held position, boots anchored in place, arms still crossed or half raised mid-motion from before. It was as if their bodies couldn't decide whether to move or not, whether to look away or keep watching. They'd seen combat wounds before. Worse, louder, but not like this. Not from her, not from a woman they'd all dismissed 10 minutes ago as the non-combat medic, not without warning, not without raising her voice. Elena didn't linger. She moved to the edge of the ring, past Chief Harmon, past the operators still staring, past the judgment that had been following her since she arrived at the facility that morning. She unclipped her gloves, tucked them into her belt, then turned and stood at parade rest, quietly watching the medics work. Not gloating, not apologizing, just steady. Behind her, someone finally whispered it. She didn't even flinch. Another voice followed, lower, more reverent. She gave them a chance. They just didn't take it. The sound of Velcro, splints, and bone stabilization filled the air now. Nothing else. No more laughter, no more whispers. Just a brutal kind of respect that no one dared speak aloud yet. But it was there, circling the mat like a shadow, because everyone understood now. Elena Kincaid wasn't a female instructor. She was the last person you wanted to underestimate. Within the hour, the command structure responded. Marcus Hale was rushed into surgery with a torn ACL, fractured patella, and tibial plateau fracture. The medical team stopped short of calling it a total knee rebuild, but the orthopedic consult didn't mince words. Brandon Riker had suffered a spiral fibula fracture and full ankle dislocation. Vascular compromise was avoided by 6 minutes. By 1400 hours, an operational inquiry had been launched. Elena Kincaid was not arrested, but she was escorted, quietly, by base security to a sealed debriefing room where a legal officer, an investigation rep, and an official from Naval Special Warfare Command sat waiting. She stood at ease. No attorney, no attitude, just clarity. The officer across from her, a woman with silver bars and a thin laptop, asked without preamble, Petty Officer Kincaid was... "At what point did you determine the situation was no longer a controlled demonstration?" Elena answered without hesitation. "The moment they struck me with real intent. I was off balance, mid-shift, and there was no pre-contact indicator. That moved it out of drill protocol and into survival training. Did you issue a verbal warning?" "Yes." "What was it?" "You've crossed into live response." The room was quiet for a few seconds too long. The legal officer tapped a few keys. "We've reviewed partial footage from Security Cam 2. No audio, but the strikes are clear. They showed her a still, Marcus and Brandon, mid-lunge, her body just beginning to fold, her head already turning. Another still, Marcus on the ground, Brandon mid-fall, clean, precise, instantaneous. Was this level of force necessary?" the rep asked. Elena kept her voice steady. "If I had hesitated, I would have been overrun. The injuries were caused by their forward momentum against applied rotational locks and stabilization failures. I didn't generate force. I used theirs." The board took her statement, word for word, then moved to the second phase, witness testimony. Over 30 SEALs gave formal accounts. Their words weren't emotional. They were technical. It wasn't staged. They struck first. She gave them a warning. It wasn't ego. She responded with total control. The testimony was consistent. Even the medics confirmed timing. Marcus's fracture occurred from an interior drop pivot. Brandon's break came from a targeted heel check to the fibula head, textbook counter-mobility technique. One SEAL from Red Squadron wrote a one-line statement. "I've seen less restraint in combat." The review board spent 3 days compiling the full file. No one pressured them, but there were whispers at the Pentagon, in Congress, on military social feeds, about the incident. A female petty officer breaking 2 SEALs in front of 282 witnesses. It didn't matter how justified it was. It had to be handled. By the end of the week, the report was complete, 52 pages. Medical evidence, verified. Witness accounts, consistent. Video corroboration, match. Precedent, self-defense in breach of protocol. There would be no disciplinary action against Elena Kincaid. But there would be consequences elsewhere. The verdict wasn't announced over loudspeakers. There were no briefings, no press statements, just 3 orders, quietly distributed through internal channels. 1. Senior operator Marcus Hale was relieved of all active duty responsibilities pending medical separation. His record would reflect violation of demonstration protocol, disregard of direct instructor authority, and use of unsanctioned force during a live evaluation. 2. Trainee Brandon Riker was removed from the Gold Team pipeline indefinitely. His actions were logged under conduct unbecoming and deliberate endangerment during structured exercise. 3. Petty Officer, First Class. Elena Kincaid was cleared of all misconduct, fully, formally, without caveats. The language used in her review was clinical, but final. Responded to non-consensual aggression within the bounds of tactical doctrine. Maintained appropriate force restraint. No violation of UCMJ. No deviation from field medical response guidelines. There was no ceremony, but in a back office near the training compound, Command Master Chief Julian Reyes, a 23-year veteran who rarely spoke during evaluations, called her in for a quiet word. He didn't look up from the clipboard in front of him when she stepped into the room, didn't shake her hand. He just said, "I've seen men in your position freeze. You didn't. You didn't overcorrect either. You just did what needed doing, and you didn't turn it into a moment. That's why it landed like one." He scribbled something onto the page, then tore it off and passed it across the table. It was a reassignment slip. Temporary field leadership rotation, medical tactics liaison. Effective immediately. Not a medal, not a speech, but it meant something. It meant they didn't just forgive her for what happened, they were building from it. Later that week, someone on base updated the internal rotation roster. Her name was still there, but this time there was no asterisk, no observer tag, no parenthetical rank note, just Kincaid, lead, Tier 2 protocol instructor. The men didn't talk about it much, but they noticed, and none of them ever stepped into that circle again without remembering the day someone tried to break her and ended up broken instead. The compound was quieter now. 2 weeks had passed since the incident, and most of the routine had returned. Morning drills, live fire rotations, breach simulations at dawn, but something else had settled in too. Something invisible but felt. There was a shift in how people moved when she entered a room. Not deferential, not afraid, just alert, respectful. Elena Kincaid didn't carry herself any differently. She still wore the same uniform, same gloves, tucked into the same belt loop, still spoke in short, clipped sentences, still showed up early and left late. But no one called her Doc anymore, like it was a joke. They called her Petty Officer, or Ma'am, or nothing at all, just nodded when she passed. Late one afternoon, after a low-angle evac drill in a gravel clearing near the southeastern wall, Elena was restocking medical gear from the back of a Humvee when she heard footsteps approach behind her. She turned and saw SEAL operator First Class Dane Rowley, one of the older guys, 8 tours, silver-bearded, eyes like sandpaper. He hadn't said a word to her since the day she arrived. Until now. He glanced down at the trauma shears she was holstering, then looked her in the eye. "You didn't break them because you wanted to," he said. "You broke them because they forced you to." Elena said nothing. He nodded once, just once, and walked away. That was it. No handshake, no medal, no apology for what others had said, just truth. And that truth spread, quietly, through repetition, through how they looked at her during drills, through how no one ever questioned her spot on the line again. Through the way younger trainees began asking questions instead of making jokes. No one ever brought up Marcus Hale or Brandon Riker by name, not in briefings, not in lunch lines, not in locker rooms, but everyone remembered what happened. Not as scandal, not as gossip, as lesson. What Elena had done wasn't about anger, it was about survival, about what happens when arrogance meets training and loses. She wasn't just a medic anymore, she was part of the unit. And the only woman in the room who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Would you have stepped into that circle if you knew what she was capable of? Do you think she held back, or did they just force her hand? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe discipline should always outrank ego, tap that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss what's coming next. Share this story with someone who still thinks strength only comes in one size. And when you're done, check out the other stories appearing on your screen right now. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, with a brand new video.